Hello, everybody. This is another edition of the Gabby Mac Project. Mucho gusto. And tonight, I've got something to say. Tonight, I'm going to talk about a subject that makes some black people uncomfortable. And in fact, it may piss some people off that I'm going to talk about it out loud. And it concerns our black aristocracy and its predecessor, the so called talented 10%. Now, people know it exists because in any society, you're going to have people that are at the top, in the middle, and at the bottom. But because in some circles it carries such an emotional reaction, it's not talked about loudly anymore. Because to some, it reeks of elitism. Okay, let's look at it from a historical standpoint, shall we? Now, this concept really originated back in 1860 by Abraham Lincoln. Now, see, Lincoln played with the idea of giving the elective franchise to what he called the very intelligent black men, colored men. And those colored men that he was referring to were the 258,000 free Negroes in the South and the 155,000 freed Negroes in the North, combined with the 200,000 black soldiers that were fighting for the North. So if you add it up, considering that there were roughly 4 million Negroes in America in 1860, that comes out to about 60%, about 10%. Some would argue that bringing this thought up is what led to President Lincoln's demise. Now, about, 40 years later, in the early 1900s, a basic concept was put forth. And basically, the concept said that the talented 10th represented only 1 in 10 black men who could be cultivated with the ability to become leaders of the black community. And they would do this by acquiring, as a prerequisite, a college education, which would allow them to write books and become more involved in social change. Now, Dr. W. E. Du Bois believed that these college-educated men should sacrifice their personal interests and use their education to lead and better the entire black community. Now, it was only later in life that Dr. Du Bois amended that thought to acknowledge that leadership could arise on many levels. And grassroots efforts were also important to social change. But the core belief was that the Negro race, like all races, was going to be saved by its exceptional men. And those men, in turn, would guide the masses away from the worst of its consequences. But back to Dr. Du Bois. Now, he believed that college-educated men should sacrifice their personal interests and use their education to lead and better the black community, as I said earlier. But just to get into that fraternity of the talented 10th required African Americans to be college educated. Now, that was a noble goal, but through the ensuing years, those one-time lofty ideals have been usurped by the lure of power, prestige, and prominence. And in today's numbers, that talented 10th equates to about 4.7 million African Americans, to break it down. In America today, there are roughly 1,500,000 black millionaires in the United States. And the professions such as doctors, lawyers, and engineers are represented at a rate of 5%, respectively, in each category. Now, I think it's safe to say that the talented 10th of today have succumbed to the idea of the me generation, not the we generation of the past. You see, they focus on their own interests as opposed to the general interests of their racial community. In other words, they have smelled the aphrodisiac of capitalism and have become the new black aristocracy. You see, they have reaped the benefits of the civil rights movement for themselves and their offsprings. They became the profiteers. The masses be damned. Now, they threw the change of being their brother's keepers away. And to be fair, although it breaks my heart to say it, I understand why they have abandoned the masses. You see, when you look at the African American community in general, as they do, and they see people who have lost respect for themselves. And it's true. We used to be a proud people. In the 60s, you would never have seen young black men running around with their pants hanging below their waist, not knowing that they're mimicking a prison culture because the inmates aren't allowed to have belts, so the pants slag off of them. And the women, you would have never seen black females with orange, green, or yellow hair. And you damn sure wouldn't see them in the streets wearing bonnets and slippers. So yeah, I understand why they would want to separate themselves from what some have called a trash culture. But you see, now that the talented 10th have reached a measure of success in America, they engage in more self-indulgence. They sit on the sidelines and are entertained by the new minstrel artists such as hip-hop entertainers and the reality shows. Those things just reinforce the negative stereotypes about the larger black community. You see, they consider themselves above the struggle of the masses. And unfortunately, we no longer have the strong voice or voices in the African American community that can galvanize the community to do better. There are no Dr. Du Bois, Dr. Martin Luther King, or even Malcolm X. Maybe someday a leader will emerge with the charisma and the vision necessary to unite the various tribes of African Americans. I'm not going to hold my breath for that. I probably won't be here. Now, in closing, this is Gabby Max 25 cents. I don't think anything can or will be done to uplift the masses in the short term. Now, they say a generation spans 20 to 30 years. So let's see. I believe the degradation in the black community began in the late 60s. So, if that is true, that's almost 3 generations till today. And let's talk about what's happened during those 3 generations. Black marriage rates have declined to laughable numbers, but the number of single-parent households has skyrocketed. And these things have been normalized in the black community. I personally think the past and current generations are a lost cause. Hopefully, the next generation, Generation Alpha, will give us better results. We'll see. Gabby Mack. O-U-T.